All right, so I think me and Bob have had a little bit of difficulty sort of communicating the sort of big ideas of what we're saying through text. So I wanted to make a little video to sort of re-emphasize sort of the big points that we keep coming back to with the environments. First of all, value. You don't want to be worrying about color when you're composing. You want to be worrying about your value, your black and white, your gray. You want to think about, gallon, pint, teaspoon. You want to think about your big shapes, as they are, as pertains to your sort of 2D image, not your 3D shapes, but what's the composition of your image? Because you should have an image locked. You shouldn't be positioning the camera each time you take a render. You should have a camera placed and not moving, and if you move it, that's because you're making a decision to move it, not because you didn't put it quite in the same spot as you did last time. Like, your camera should be locked, and you should be composing to that camera. Again, you care mainly about your 2D image here, because if you were in a game, you'd be moving around this space in 3D, but you're not. You're making a portfolio image, and it's always about serving the needs of your medium. And in this case, your medium is a portfolio image, so you want it to look as good as you can from angle A. If you want to take 3 screenshots, then maybe you have 3 angles that you work to. But it's all about executing what you've decided to do as effectively as possible. And you don't have to worry about anything other than your final product. So, and lastly, this is a really hard one. I still struggle with this, but be bold. Like, don't, if a lot of the time we've given notes and you guys have sort of done 10% of the change that we were hoping, and that's fine. It's challenging. 3D is a lot of work, so it's very easy to go, oh well, I don't want to, it'll be too much time to do this. I'll shrink this thing by 10%, or whatever. So I understand that's a challenge, but it's something to always strive for, is like, make the big change. Don't just do what's easy. And that's sort of what the whole Paintover thing was meant to emphasize, is stop worrying about, how am I going to change the shape? All these verts are going to get fucked up. Don't care about the verts. Don't care about what you have to do in 3D to make it happen. If you have the Paintover, you have 100% control of what's on the screen, and then you can create the ideal image and then work towards that in 3D, and hopefully get as close as you can. Maybe you won't get it perfectly the way your Paintover looked, but it gives you something to aspire to that's not being constrained, because a lot of the time you'll be constrained by 3D without realizing it. You'll just make something because it's easy to do in Maya rather than because it makes a good image, and you won't even realize that that's what you're doing. But the scenes, it shows in your guys' scenes right now that they look like 3D scenes, made without sort of the free mind out of the matrix of composition. That was terrible. Anyway, let's look at Paintovers. So this, I think, like, this is a good improvement over what was there before. I think that it's still a little timid. So you have your fire here, right? And you also have these foreground elements. And I have added some adjustment layers. I have a black and white and a posterize. And that actually looks pretty good. You've got a focal point. You've got your tent here. This is a really good start. And I think that, you deserve credit also for, like, going in and changing all the background stuff a couple weeks ago. So that's awesome. I think that, excuse me, like, so let's go back into black and white, because like I was saying, we only care about value. A fire, if it's realism-wise, if you have a fire that's lighting up these candles this much, then the ground's going to be lit up that much too. Like, maybe the candles are wildly more bright than the ground, but still, like, this isn't what would happen, right? If this is this dark on the side, then you'd be getting, shadows coming out from the candles. This is a terrible Paintover, but they can be terrible. That's sort of the point. It's just being, you know, bold again, and just doing everything that you can. So, you know, you can have shadows. You also, I would, my take on this is that I would want to see just like way more light here, um, just because this is your main light source. It's going to be, it should be driving most of the lighting that's happening in your scene. And right now, it still feels like it's fighting against sort of your main directional, not as much as before. So nice work. But like, just you know, just really like, what can I do with this fire? You know, don't worry about if it's realistic or not. But like, you know, you can do this. I think this is what John Clapp used to do in, or does in 117, you know, and then you can start painting out shadow areas or something. I don't know. Um, you know, I don't have time to go in and like for real do a paint over here, but like this is sort of what I was thinking of, is like just get in there, you know. Let me see, probably knock back this background. Like another thing that you really want to be thinking about in a 3D environment that that is super important is like your foreground, middle ground, and background. And so there are lots of ways to make that work. I'm going to tone this down a little bit. Bring this out just a bit. Yeah, that doesn't look great, but you know, we'll get there. You'll get there. I'm not going to. Let me see. So foreground, middle ground, background. One opportunity you have here is you have geometry in your foreground that's really big shapes, and you know, I really like this kind of idea of you peeking through into this, you know, witch's camp that you're not supposed to be here. You know, you're not supposed to be looking over here. And so, you know, if you actually went in and made these plants like silhouette very strongly against the warmth of the scene behind it, that would really add a lot of depth to this image. Because right now, you know, if I go back, these plants, these ones are doing okay, but like the rest of them are kind of the same. They're the same value as the rest of the scene, and they're not really popping forward. And you would really want to have, especially here in the Unreal, but like you'd really want to have these dramatically, dramatically popping forward. And like personally, I would probably add more. Try to simplify, because this is kind of a complex shape that you don't really want distracting from your scene probably. You know, but you can vignette it a little bit. You know, maybe try to get some gesture into the shapes as they frame the scene. You know, I don't know, maybe a vine. That's maybe a bad idea. Whatever. That's the point, though. You want to try bad ideas in your paint over and quickly erase them. Like, find your big ideas in the paint over and don't worry about it looking bad, because you can clean it up. But you know, if you start working clean and carefully, you're going to miss like the big opportunities to make a huge impression. And like the more big opportunities you miss, the more sort of safe and uninteresting your image will look. So, you know, if you find these huge things you can do, you know, maybe you paint this out. Now this is becoming more of a focal point, because I think right now the tent, like, it wants to be a focal point, but it's just not interesting yet. Like, I think the cloth you've done in the paint over is great, because that's hard to model, you know. And maybe, you know, if you weren't doing a paint over, you would just leave it as like a canvas expedition tent or something, because that's so much easier to make, but it doesn't look as good. You know, and if you follow through with the paint over and do like a cloth sim, whether you're, you know, if you have access to Marvelous Designer, or do it in Maya and cloth, or sculpt it all in ZBrush, like that's going to be a great impactful part of your scene. But anyway, you know, this is the base. You get the idea. Like, it's just a matter of what can I do to make this more impactful. You know, and now I'm losing this area, so maybe I'd go in, you know, talking again about foreground, middle ground, background. We probably want to pop this stuff away from what's behind it, like you know, something like this. And this is a lighting challenge because you have to sort of, you can paint this easily, but you know, you have to sort of go in and figure out a way in Unreal to actually do this, or Maya. Um, and it's tricky, but it is possible. Like, I have gotten a lot of lighting notes that I was initially like, how the hell am I supposed to do that? But over time, you know, you start trying things out and you find ways to make your scenes read better, and ways to do sort of impossible things with lighting that you didn't think you could manage, because like basically all lighting is fake. It's not done correctly, you know, in the way you would expect. So everything's a trick. Anyway, this is a really rough paint over, but you sort of hopefully get the idea of just like being bold with your choices and following through on them, because this is an opportunity. You know, I do want to say, like, you guys have 4 weeks or whatever left. You do have to actually make the scene and execute on this vision. So like, I'm not saying go back and do another week's worth of paintovers, but maybe keep this in mind for your next environment, like for your process, because there's a lot of possibility in sort of a paintover like this. And that's sort of the point here, not that you have to fix everything you did already, but just like think about ways you can do this type of thing next time. Yeah, so just try things, you know, always be thinking about contrast and things popping in front of other things. Like, if you're working in a 3D scene, this applies to 2D too, but just like, you want to be able to make out the shapes of your most important things. Like, I want this tent to pop against the background, so, you know, you always want to make sure that a shape like that is silhouetting nicely against the background. And that might mean that the background's darker, it might mean the background's lighter. It really depends on the context. But, you know, you want to create this sort of series of layers of your foreground, middle ground, and background. Like, I don't even know, this would probably take more work to make sure that the firelight is not extending too far in this direction, and maybe the firelight ends up being inconsistent, you know, inconsistently spread throughout the scene, but that's okay. That's, you know, that's fakery that is worth doing if it's helping your composition. So anyway, that's my thoughts on this one. This one, so I feel like this is sort of doing going the opposite direction of what I was thinking of, because if you look at this, one of the things I was liking about this is that it silhouettes nicely. It's got it's got a strong value structure where you have this, and I was saying before, like, I'd really like to see the top plane dramatically different value from the sides, so that you sort of pop the shapes a little bit more and get that 3D look. But here we have sort of the coloring has taken away, you know, as we were talking about value first and before color, like, all the values have sort of gone towards the center. You've got sort of a very noisy gray image now that doesn't read as well. And, you know, if I go into posterize it, like, we don't have a strong sense of a focal point. You know, the brightest stuff is sort of the castle, which is good, but like, there's so many sort of equally sized dark to light gradients, you know. We don't have big dark areas of the picture except for the sky. Everything is sort of the full range of value, dark to light, light to dark, you know, here, in the trees, on the rocks. Everything is sort of the same. And that's something that you want to avoid. So like, one thing I would start out with is like, you know, I was sort of suggesting this before, you know, how do I make this part stand out? You know, like, I can see you have a material change, but value-wise, it's almost identical. So like, you know, you could go in on the top and start lightening this surface, and already that's going to create something interesting. However, you know, it also creates an issue of, you know, the buildings are light, so now the buildings aren't going to pop against the light surface, and maybe there's a way to resolve that. Maybe make the sides light and the top dark, maybe not. Like, this is sort of the problem solving that you have to do. because there's different ways you could handle it. You could just sort of blend the buildings into the ground, and maybe you're okay with that. You know, that might be an option. You could use lighting to sort of pop these a little bit more. You know, that's one thing. Another thing is just shapes. I think this piece has been the shapes, like it looks like you have a different camera angle here, and like I want to re-emphasize, you know, you want to lock your camera. If you're doing this in Maya, then that's easy. You know, you just make a camera that you only use for your renders. If it's in Unreal, then that's trickier, but there's ways to do that. But yeah, like just try to have a fixed position. And so like composition wise, I'm gonna actually try painting over this because I think this one, all the added detail will make it hard for me to paint over effectively. But like going back into black and white, like compositionally, I think this one is just struggling because you have sort of, you know, we talk about like the rule of thirds, and you have sort of, places where it's effective to have a focal, god damn it, effective to have a focal point. And this castle is like almost near the center line, but not quite, which is kind of like unpleasant to look at. I think it's like the whole balance of the picture is like sort of centered, but sort of not, but it's not committed to being in one quadrant or third of the picture. Like it's sort of, it doesn't know where it wants to be. And I feel like, you know, this tree also is like almost touching the edge of the composition, but it's not, and that's sort of not nice to look at either. Like I would want to probably see it either like fully away from that side of the screen, or like actually crossing across the border and making a committed decision to be, you know, either on screen or not. And right now I think this is, it's not quite a tangent, but it's close enough. It's like just touching the edge of the camera, the frame. And I don't like it. So like this is, again, like the Paintover I think is your opportunity to really try to push this composition into someplace more bold, because I think it just feels sort of like, it doesn't look like it's sure where it wants to be going. Like especially with rocks, like like in your reference you had, some of those World of Warcraft rocks are very like gestural. So maybe you'll have, you know, grab a darker color and a lighter color. You know, maybe because these are just sort of, feels a little random. Damn it. All right. You know, maybe you have rocks going like this, and then they're like swooshing up here, and maybe like here too. So, you know, let's like just fill some of this out, and then think about like how do I make these rock shapes follow this this sort of gesture. You know, and this is tricky, but once you have like big rock meshes like I was talking about before, you can sort of start you know, just aligning them in these ways and really selling the gesture of a shape, which can be really useful. And like you have sort of this compositional shape here that's like a wave, and it's got the potential to be really energetic, but right now it's kind of conservative, and like I'm gonna just pull this out here and add more background, I guess, just to demonstrate like this could be like way more out here. You know, you could start like really, you could really sit this whole thing on the edge of a cliff. This was sort of the type of thing I was talking about with Casey's piece. And now this is all not in the right spot. So, you know, this is probably the wrong way to go about it. But like let's do it. Let's go the other direction with it. Sorry about that. Like extend this down, and then like really, really go for it. Like this is the boldness that I'm talking about. Like what if you had it all the way like that? That's too far, right? So we go back. But like maybe you still want it to sort of curve around like that. Um, and then once again, you sort of figure out the way that your rocks are going in a way that's sort of nice and persuasive. And I'm just going to scribble these forms because it's not worth trying to resolve them. But like, you see the idea, like the rocks are creating a gesture of this wave shape, and then maybe you can have like plant matter vines or something off the edge to sort of emphasize that precarity. And then like look at the, again, I'm not saying you should go out of like the 1080p resolution. I think that's probably a good thing. But like now maybe you have an opportunity to sort of like really have this tree go further out. Maybe you want more tree now. Maybe it's gonna hang over the edge or something a little bit more. Like, again, this can be really messy. Like, that's what I was thinking with these paintovers is like really like go for your big shapes. Figure out what you can do. Maybe this castle you want it to silhouette better. Maybe you don't want a tree blocking it like that. I think that would actually be nice because right now your trees are sort of the same size, and that's that sort of saps the energy of your composition, right? You want different shapes. You want different sizes on the screen. So maybe one small tree, one big tree. You could just have this be like a huge tree. I liked your vines that you added hanging down from the trees. I think that was a good example of like doing something in the paintover that would be, you'd be resistant or hesitant to if you were just doing everything in Maya, because it's a pain in the ass, right? So yeah, just like look for opportunities to really just push stuff. Even the castle, you could, I want to see it maybe taller. Right now it's a little bit squat, I guess, and maybe, I would rather see it pushed far in one direction or another. Like right now it's sort of square. And I think I would love to see it, would love to see it thinner and taller maybe. Something like that, but I would also love to see it shorter and wider. If you brought this down, and let me see, if you brought this down and started sort of spreading out the architecture of the central piece, to the point where it's like capping this cliff. I don't know. These are just ideas. I'm not saying definitely do any of these things, but just think about shapes more. Big shapes. What's the read of your scene? Because I think that's where this is not quite working yet. It's just it feels too safe and not making a statement about like what is this place? What does it look like? You want a big dramatic, and like, see, I've added like a darker thing here, and now I'm losing the silhouette behind it. So here's a place where maybe I would go in and say maybe there's a lighter cloud behind it, and just like wah, and then start fading that out. Like, you can do this. We do this at work all the time, like just big mist clouds that just pop things forward in the scene. Like it's incredibly easy to do, and it looks great. Stuff like this. And then, like, you don't really, this is a sort of a far away shot. You don't really have a foreground, but if you wanted to, you could absolutely like have some sort of, foreground clouds, which would even more like sell sort of the feeling of being really, really high in the sky. And this is I'm not putting any thought into the composition of these or anything, but it's an idea. You could have these in the foreground, and suddenly you've got like way, way, way more depth to your scene. And I think that, yeah, that's compositionally this isn't great, but you sort of see where I'm going with this. Like, look how much more depth there is here. Um, ah, so that's something to think about. Brett, I think I appreciate your your breaking this up with all these pieces. I think that's a good idea. I do think like um, maybe it's a little still too of a like a mechanical way of thinking about this process, just because like you can turn things on and off, but like that doesn't help you make changes. And the types of changes that I might want to see um, here, like, and again, not saying you should do this, but like think about it, is, you know, what if you just wrote off this entire side, and maybe you just want to have a perspective change where um, you know, you just see that side of the building. That looks terrible, but you know, you'd have to adjust it for that to work. But you know, then you get more opportunity for mountains in the background, and then you could have the sign sticking out as a silhouette piece. You know, and you can still have some stuff going on back here, and it's just it's less. It's take because I personally I feel like this whole area, it's nice. You've done a nice job with these pieces, but it's just like too many ideas in one picture, and sort of condensing it to me would be like a good option. But this is like a bold choice, is like cutting this entire thing, cutting the entire monolith, like the types of things that are hard to do when you're modeling and using a digital camera, you know, and sort of simulating everything. Like it's like, well, that's a big change. How do I do that? Whereas with the Paintover, you know, you can sort of just do it and then figure out the details later, because you will figure out the details. The more, you know, the more you put yourself in positions like this where you're like, well, how do I do that? The better you get, the faster you get good, because you're struggling. You know, at work that sort of comes naturally because your boss will say, do this, and you'll think, I don't know how to do that, but he doesn't care, so you just do it anyway. So, you know, and now maybe like, I don't know, you put a cactus over here or something really dim that that's not drawing the eye. But I think that sort of, in fact, you know, I think having sort of this shape over here makes it feel more closed in, and maybe sort of bringing down the skyline over on this side makes this, it sort of sells the feeling more that you're in the middle of nowhere, to have sort of a low horizon that's open on both sides. Like now I feel a little bit more isolated out here, which might be something you want to go for, maybe not, but it's just a thought here, you know. And you know, feel free to do completely cheap, you know, faked rim lighting on everything. Like this is completely allowed. There's ways to do it in Unreal without ruining your lighting. It's, you know, and it can really help just with the drama of your scene. I'll knock that back, but you know, something like that looks completely out of perspective. But my thought is maybe that you just like move the camera or rotate this a little bit so that you're getting less back here. And you know, I think that this is overall going really well. So don't take this as you're doing it all terribly wrong. I think that like there's opportunities for, you know, bolder choices when you're doing these Paintovers. Like, hey, what if I just made this like way bigger? You know, how's that look? And stuff like that. What if this was, you know, I already said make this bigger, but what if it was twice as big again? You know, like a giant novelty thing. Like you can really do stuff like this at this stage, and it will often help your scene, just because you didn't have the nerve to do stuff like this in Maya because it's hard, you know. But you know, what else can you do that I'm not thinking of? That, you know, what if you made these tentacles go all the way over the back and like into the backyard? That's probably stupid, you know, but think of things that are probably stupid, and sooner or later you'll think of something that's actually awesome. Um, Stuff like that. Yeah, that's bad. Don't do that. Maybe the back one. I don't know. Anyway, or maybe one of them can be like going around here. I don't know. It looks like it would be expensive for them to build that, but yeah, again, like just have these thoughts and try things that are like outside the scope of what you can do. And again, we're several weeks into the project at this point. I'm not saying do that for this, but like next environment, try to make this part of your process is just going crazy and having as many ideas, as many ideas as you can, and just pushing them as far as you can. All right, this one I think is like the lighting is actually really nice, and I think this is working really well because you have that sort of this is the center of attention, the focal point. Unfortunately, it's a water heater, and there's not really any storytelling to a water heater, right? So, actually, maybe one thing I would do is vignette it a little bit so that you don't have, because I think the boxes are as far as like being the brightest object or most contrasting object in the scene, the boxes are kind of competing a little bit. You already have a bit of a vignette going naturally, I think, with the light, but you can do a bit of that, and that'll help as well. So, like, I think this is actually going very well. Excuse me. Going very well. I would look for opportunities to make the scene more natural, less sort of digital looking. We talked about this a little bit before, but like something like maybe this is unlikely for a fluorescent light, so maybe don't do this, but having a hanging cord to turn it on and off, or maybe that's for like the garage door, I don't know. But maybe the chain for the garage door is up here. There's different things you can be doing. With the pipes, maybe this you've already started like rotating things, I think, which is good. Maybe this shelf is askew just a little bit. Maybe this whole board, maybe this whole board is off axis. It's because it's an old garage probably, and it's not all perfectly put together, and that's how things look in real life. And you can push that beyond, like, even if you're doing sort of realism, you can slightly like go beyond the normal amount of jank and skewiness for a scene, and people will like it better. It'll be like a heightened reality kind of. So anyway, I think this is good. You're on the right track. The one thing I would say is just like, is there a way to put something here that tells any kind of a story? Because right now it's just like, it's just a garage, Like, what could you put here that would make this interesting and worth looking at? Because right now it's sort of like, apart from sort of technical skill, which is good enough for an entry level portfolio, but like, what can you put here to show that you're thinking about stories? I would start with like a broom. That's not very interesting, but it's something, or a mop. Maybe you put a mop here, and then you have a mop bucket. Okay, that's still pretty boring, right? Maybe the mop bucket fell over and there's a big puddle on the ground, and that gives you some sort of cool reflection opportunities. And maybe this door is open. Maybe somebody had to run out of the room really fast and they knocked over the mop bucket. That sounds dramatic, right? What could have happened? Maybe you can put some other things around here that that give you clues as to what might have happened. Maybe there's a phone off the hook. That might be a little too far, but like, I think there's opportunities to tell some kind of a story, even like part of a story in a scene like this, and make it interesting. And right now, I think your layout and composition and your level of detail is really good. It just needs like something extra to make it interesting. So that's my thoughts on the Paintovers. I think like going forward, once again, like I know you guys have a limited amount of time, so anything I say, like take it or leave it. you know, obviously getting your work done is the priority, and getting it in on time. But if you have plans to go back and revise a scene after a portfolio, or you know, for literally any scene you make after this, I think this type of process is really important. And the thing that me and Bob have been trying to emphasize is process, is how you get the most out of an idea, as you go from beginning to end. Because you know, executing the models and the assets is difficult, but that's sort of like you know, that's its own set of challenges, and that's its own skill set. Whereas making an environment is all about composition and layout and lighting. And so that's why we've been emphasizing that stuff so much, because modeling is sort of a thing that goes along with environment art, but they are kind of separate disciplines. And so, you know, just trying to give you guys ideas. Oh yeah, one thing for this, like, it also doesn't quite have foreground elements. It's a pretty narrow FOV, so, you know, but I don't know. Maybe that's bad, but maybe like a support thing. I don't know. Don't just do what I said, because I'm not thinking about it very much at all. But you know, think about whether there's potential for something in the foreground, or some kind of thing to frame the scene. If there's not, then there's not. I think it's already working pretty well as a composition. But yeah, that's just something to think about. Anyway, yeah, that's all. See you guys later.